what happened was I was in the morning at the motel and inadvertently did not know checkout was at 11 o'clock, as I was not given my receipt, etc., the night before. As the hotel clerk said, I would be able to pick that up in the morning. So I didn't know when checkout time was. The phone in my room was broken. Yes, I could have called. So yes, it was my error to not know it was 11 o'clock checkout. However, I was left my room and went to the pool. And I was in the pool, and at 20 after 11, there was a voicemail on my phone, and I listened to it, and it was the hotel clerk saying that they had, it was checkout time was 11, and that they had removed all my items from my room and taken it to the office. Mind you, I was in the pool, I was soaking wet, and I went down to the office to retrieve my property. And when I went in, I was upset. No swearing, no cursing, just telling them I wanted my property. And they slowly retrieved it from the office. And then I asked, I'm standing there soaking wet. I asked, can I go to the room? No, you cannot go to the room. You're trespassed from here. And it was like, what? And I knew that I didn't have my pillow that I had taken with me personally to my room. And I had to beg the motel clerk to get my pillow. And she went up to get it and then came down with it. And then by that time, I have to tell you that between the time I asked for my pillow, she called the police. And by that time, when she returned with my pillow, the police were there. And I'm standing there soaking wet and no option to change my clothes, dry off or anything. And I'm just having to battle with this bully of a woman that will not help me and has now called the police because I was upset. I'm trying to understand it all, but I felt very violated, having all my property removed and not being able to go back to the room to make sure that everything was there. And as it turned out, once the police talked to me, and they were very kind, they said, "Are you the troublemaker?" And they weren't mad at me. I said, "No, I'm not." But I said, at 20 after 11, after the checkout time, she removed all my property, and I'm the only person here today. I'm the only car in the parking lot, and I was the only person here, and no one even came to check in the pool. And they said, well, what can we do? And I said, well, I'm just wanting to get my property and make sure that I have it. And they said, well, you're going to have to leave the property because you've been trespassed. And I've been a flight attendant. I've been in lots of hotel and motel situations and never, ever encountered such an discompassionate, discourteous, rude, bullying person in my life in the motel industry. It's just, it made no sense. And then from there, they said I had to leave. And then I got in the car and I realized I didn't have my map atlas, which was something I had beside the bed in my room. And the officer asked, his name was Officer Omar, by the way, and he was very kind. And he had told me, he goes, look, you're a nice lady. She is not. And he pointed at the motel clerk. And I said, well, regardless, I said, I don't have my property and I've been trying to get up there to change my clothes and to see if everything was put in my bags. And so he ended up counting her and escorting her up to my room 35 at Howard Johnson's on Houston Street in Spokane, Washington. And when they returned, she had my atlas, which is a very huge piece of a book that had been beside the bed. And she had told me, oh, I carefully packed everything. I got it all. Well, here she did not have my pillow. She did not have my atlas. And the officer was carrying my electric toothbrush and charger. And it was just like, that was why I wanted to check the room. And it was just so discourteous and inhumane and such. She was a bully. She told me prior to this that I was entitled. Oh, you're so entitled. And I said, I am. I'm entitled to be able to go back to my room. It was 20 after 11. It's a violation, yes, but 20 after 11, 20 minutes after checkout, and you're removing all my property, that's just mean and cruel. And there was the responses for her saying that I was entitled. And I said, yes, I am, to my property. And to know that here there were 3 expensive pieces of property that were not packed and they were not touched by me. And by the way, the officers did leave, and I then had to go across the street because I couldn't be on the property. And I was trying just to get my bearings, because you can imagine I was upset by that kind of behavior and treatment, and still being soaking wet and not having the opportunity. There is no restroom or a public restroom in the lobby there. It's a very small lobby. I mean, it's a star 2 property for Howard Johnson. And I was just still rattled. And when I was across the street, sitting across the street, officer number 1 came up to me and he goes, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Okay, we'll take care." And off he went. And then the other officer, I forgot to mention that there were 2 police that came for this indiscretion of me being a late checkout. And the second officer came over across the street to me and he goes, "Are you doing okay?" And I said, "Yes." And I'm just trying to get my GPS set up here. And then he said, "Did you call the police?" I said, "No." And he goes, "Oh, she called them again." And I looked over across the street and there was another set of officers there. Whether they were there for me or not, I could assume they were, since I was the only guest there. But I just looked at the officer and I just said, she needs to take some vitamins. And the officer threw back his head and laughed. And he said, "You just take care." And then since then, I'm a member of Wyndham Rewards. And they are the ones that made the reservation initially for me at Howard Johnson's hotel. And so, motel. And so I didn't know it. I've never been to Spokane. I've never been, obviously, to this property. So I called Wyndham and they just said, well, by the end of the week with this, I told them everything that had happened, just as I've told everyone here on this interview. And they said, well, we'll get back to you in a week. And when they got back to me, they washed their hands of it and said that you're going to have to talk to the manager of that property and try to get your refund. And they gave me the phone number, which of course was to the property that I stayed at. And then within the Wyndham letter to me, they talked about their core values, clean place, very good customer service and care of the customer, which of course was nothing I experienced. And I just think Wyndham needs to know about how inappropriate this human, her name is Tina McCall, who is the manager of the property. And I've just been trying to get in touch with them about it. And they just kept saying, it's 11 o'clock checkout, you have to adhere to their rules. But I understand that. I made an error. I admitted to it. But to be treated so poorly and inappropriately, and not to be able to retrieve my property and have to beg to get the remains of my property was just wrong to any human being. I did that just to be treated so poorly. And then as going forward, I did make the call that following Monday, which is a week later after my stay at the Howard Johnson's. And the manager is Tina McCall. And she goes, "Oh, it's you." And I go, "Oh, are you the one that treated me so poorly and removed my property?" She goes, "Yes. And you are not getting a refund." And she hung up on me. And since then, I have written you guys. I have written Howard. You can't get a hold of anyone at Howard Johnson in the upper echelon. There's no one to answer because they are with Wyndham. And Wyndham gave me 7,500 points, which very nice of them. However, it doesn't cover a room. On my return from Montana, I stayed in Kennewick at Le looking to, and I got to use some of my points, but not all of them because it doesn't cover a room, the amount of points they gave me. It was kind, it was a good gesture, it was, just taking care of business. However, like I said, calling that facility, having the manager be Tina McCall, and having her bully me again and hang up is no way to treat anyone. I was a paying customer. I'm a decent customer. I didn't act inappropriately. I didn't escalate anything except for being upset and telling them I'm upset and I want my property. And she talked over me all the time when I was saying that I never got my documents the night before to know exactly when checkout time was. And now where I am with this, I'm talking with you folks to get it out there about indecent care, and that, if excuse me, anything that I would say that could help this facility and to raise the stars up to a 5 would be decent training or further training for management, and making it so that the staff and customers feel safe and respected. Additional training, I think, would be very, very helpful for this individual. Okay. I would have liked to have been reimbursed for the room and anything else from there, additional nights, etc., because this was poor customer service. A bully. I mean, we have enough going on in our nation about somebody being a bully that's, we're being bullied and there was no reason for it. So in answer to your question, compensation for my stay and additional nights if that's possible.